The third adaptation of the novel Dracula is one of the most faithful, which is odd as it isn't a direct adaptation. But then there's a lot that's odd with the 1953 Dracula in Istanbul, a Turkish film, making 2 of the first 3 adaptations non-English, 3 out of 4 counting Nosferatu. The oddity continues with Bram Stoker's novel not being published in full in Turkey until the late 1990s. The story of this film begins with Ali Riza. That's his pen name and I'm sticking with it. A journalist, poet, and author. Rumor has it that he came across Dracula while working as an English translator in the press department. However he got it, he then wrote his own version of the novel in 1928, Kazikli Voyvoda, an Ottoman term for Vlad Tepes. He kept most of the characters and plot points, but changing the location to Turkey and altering the themes. In particular, it was he who identified Dracula with Vlad the Impaler. Stoker just tossed in a vague comment, making Dracula specifically an ancient foe of the Turks. After all, who was Vlad impaling? Cinematographer turned director and screenwriter Mehmet Muhtar helmed the movie adaptation of that novel at a time when Turkish cinema was taking off. With low budgets, but lots of demand. And here I have to address the poor quality of the video. Dracula in Istanbul, or Turkish Dracula as it is almost always called, was thought lost and has never had an official home release. All we've got are poor quality dupes of videotapes, with the best having a Cinema Turk logo stuck on it. This film is at the top of my wish list for a quality restoration, or better, retrieval of the negatives, but I'm not holding my breath. So when I say this film looks good, I mean I assume the original print would have looked pretty good. Then there's the questionable subtitles for us English speakers. They're unofficial, fan-made. I've watched the film with 3 different sets. None are perfect, though the ones translated by Ed Glazer that you'll find on the Neon Harbor YouTube channel upload are pretty good. If you hear someone online talking about Dracula buying kiosks, it's because they watched with subpar subtitles and didn't question them. So, how is it as an adaptation of Stoker's Dracula? As I said, bizarrely faithful. The only missing major characters are Renfield and Quincy, though most of the names have been changed to Turkish ones, so Mina is Gusen and Lucy is Shadan. And from now on I'll stick with English names so as not to offend or confuse any Turkish speakers. So we have Mina and Lucy, and so much more of Lucy than in the 1931 film. Harker, though already married to Mina. Dr. Seward, slightly aged up and no longer a suitor for Lucy. Arthur, Lucy's lone suitor. Van Helsing, and Dracula, who is imperious and off-putting, like in the book, and who for the first time has canine fangs. In Stoker's novel, he just has sharp teeth. But we also have Lucy's mother, complete with her soon-to-be fatal weak heart, and Harker's boss, 2 characters which rarely make it into adaptations. As for the plot, it's mostly all here, abridged and compressed, but here. Harker goes to Dracula's castle. He's forced to write post-dated letters, finds a secret way to get around the castle, encounters a vampire bride, only 1 instead of the standard 3, but it plays out the same, with Dracula giving her a baby and the mother coming to the castle. That's rare in adaptations. Harker sees Dracula climbing down a wall, finds him in his coffin, strikes him with a shovel, and goes mad and ends up in hospital. We get Lucy and Mina at the seaside, also rare in adaptations. Lucy sleepwalking, then found by Mina after being fed upon. Mina leaving to go to Harker in the hospital. Dr. Seward unable to figure what's wrong with Lucy and calling in Van Helsing. Transfusions. The mother's death, Lucy becoming a vampire, attacking children, and being staked, beheaded, and her mouth filled with garlic by the crew of Light, Van Helsing, Arthur, Seward, and Harker. He returns a bit earlier than in the novel. The crew of Light searching through all of Dracula's residences for his boxes of soil, and one being unaccounted for. Dracula going after Mina. The only major thing missing, which is missing from most adaptations, is the return to Transylvania at the end. Instead, Harker finds his last resting place in the city, where he's destroyed. It's shocking they got so much of Stoker's novel in the film, and it's even more as the characters are closer to their novel selves than in most versions. Particularly Dracula, harsh and controlling, and Van Helsing, who's a bit more gentle than in most adaptations, and even more so Mina. Which in a moment I'll show why that's odd. Most adaptations weaken her, turning her into either nothing but a victim or lovesick puppy. But here she has agency. This is one of my favorite versions of Mina. Considering that pirated novel, there's clearly some differences. You'd think the big one would be the switch in time and place from Victorian England to 1950s Turkey, but that doesn't alter the major plot points. Sure, they have cars and a pistol that doesn't do anything, but that's about it. Theme-wise, I'll get to that in a moment. Since it's now set in a Muslim country, Christian crosses and wafers are gone, partly replaced by Muslim symbols in the unofficial novel, but the movie avoids religion, mentioning only one Muslim charm that has no effect. Garlic is the one item that repels Dracula. Again, this is a slight change. However, a more substantial alteration, allowed due to that time and place swap, is that Mina is a showgirl, not a schoolteacher. We get 3 dance routines. And no, the dances don't distract. My preconceived notions. I assumed that a Turkish Dracula would be more conservative than an American one, but this gives us more bare flesh than would be seen in any version until the 1990s. There's 2 new characters. One, a hunchback servant of Dracula's with a very odd mustache, who gives some warning to Harker and tries to protect him, but doesn't affect the story. And second, a slimy showbiz guy who hits on Mina, briefly, just to show us she's made of sterner stuff. Okay, so this is a faithful adaptation. But is it a good adaptation? How does it deal with the adaptation problems I mentioned in my first video in this series? The switch in location does a lot of the work. Yes, we're all over-familiar with Dracula, but not Dracula in Turkey with Turkish patriotism and dancing girls. That's new. Not that the Turkish audience would have been all that familiar with the story in '53. The switch in location also helps in trimming the book's extensive content. No need for many of the multitude of travel segments. And dropping Renfield in the asylum is a neat way to cut a great deal of the book without touching the core story, much as I love Renfield. But where Turkish Dracula really wins as an adaptation is in theme, which comes from Ali Riza's rewritten book. Stoker's Dracula is a bit regressive. Fear of the outsider, support of the status quo, and a bunch of one-percenters clinging to their power. Turkish Dracula is the opposite. It's progressive. Harker, Sword, Mina, and even Arthur aren't rich dudes in ivory towers. More, they are heroes of the Turkish War of Independence. In the book. In the film, which takes place over 20 years later, they're a bit young for that, but thematically, they still are. They represent not old ways to cling to, but new ways, secular and equal, escaping from the old Ottoman Empire, and escaping from Western nations that would control them. And Dracula, he doesn't represent the outsider and unusual, but rather older and barbaric ways. He's the past they are moving on from. So Turkish Dracula does a decent job of adaptation. But outside of that, is it a good movie? Yes, or at least I think so. I like the lighting and art design, as far as I can determine looking at the terrible print we have. I can't tell with the editing. With the surviving video, there are some ragged cuts, but I suspect that's not an issue from the original, just from our video. One problem that can't be waved away due to poor video quality is the acting of the crew of light. The males, they're too calm, too stoic, way too stoic. They should be more upset, more frightened, more angry, more emphatic. I get what they were going for. These are heroes of the new Turkey, patriotic symbols, so able to stand up to anything. Sure, message-wise, okay, but it drains the excitement. I really like this film, but in its current condition, I can't recommend Turkish Dracula to most viewers. If you're a big fan of the novel, the story in general, or multiple of the other adaptations, then give it a try. And if you're enjoying this little trip through the adaptations of Dracula, then give this video a like or subscribe to catch them all when they come out.